On what was supposed to be the most beautiful day of her life, Sarah Mitchell stood in a hotel hallway at 3 in the morning, her white silk robe trembling against her skin, staring at a door she never wanted to open. Behind that door, the sound of laughter, the kind that makes your stomach turn when you recognize the voice mingling with your soon-to-be husband's. 3 hours. That's all that stood between her and walking down the aisle. 3 hours before she would promise forever to a man who, at that very moment, was betraying everything they'd built together. What she did next didn't just shock her family and friends. It changed how everyone in that church understood the meaning of strength, dignity, and revenge. This isn't a story about a wedding that fell apart. This is a story about a woman who discovered her power in the darkest moment of her life. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Sarah Mitchell wasn't the type of woman you'd expect to find herself in this situation. At 32, she'd built a successful career as a hospital administrator in Austin, Texas, the kind of person everyone described as having it all together. She met Marcus Webb 3 years earlier at a charity gala, where he'd been the guest speaker, a charismatic real estate developer whose smile could light up a room. Their connection was immediate, electric, the kind that makes you believe in fate. Within 6 months, they were inseparable. Within a year, he'd proposed on a beach in Malibu, getting down on one knee as the sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Sarah's best friend, Jennifer, remembers that night vividly. Sarah had called her crying happy tears, barely able to get the words out. Everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect, but Sarah pushed those little doubts aside, the way we all do when we're in love. What Sarah didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Marcus carried secrets heavier than the 5-carat diamond he'd placed on her finger. His ex-wife, Diana Webb, wasn't just a chapter from his past. She was a presence that had never really left, a ghost that haunted the edges of their relationship in ways Sarah was only beginning to understand. Marcus had been married to Diana for 7 years before their divorce, a union that ended, according to Marcus, because they'd grown apart, wanted different things, the usual story people tell when they don't want to admit the truth. He never spoke much about Diana, always changing the subject when Sarah asked questions, claiming it was too painful to revisit. Sarah respected that boundary, believed in giving him space to heal. But some boundaries exist not to protect healing, they exist to hide wounds that never stopped bleeding. Diana had moved to Houston after the divorce, or so Marcus had told Sarah. She'd remarried, he said, started a new life, moved on completely. Sarah had no reason to doubt him until the night everything changed. The warning signs were there. Looking back, Sarah could see them clearly, like reading a map after you've already gotten lost. 3 weeks before the wedding, Marcus started taking calls late at night, stepping out onto the balcony of their shared apartment, his voice dropping to a whisper. When Sarah asked who it was, he'd say it was work, a difficult client, nothing to worry about. She wanted to believe him, so she did. 2 weeks before the wedding, a woman called the house phone, an old number they barely used anymore, asking for Marcus. When Sarah answered, the woman hung up immediately. Marcus dismissed it as a wrong number, but Sarah noticed how his jaw tightened, how he avoided her eyes when he said it. 10 days before the wedding, Sarah found a text on Marcus's phone that he'd forgotten to delete. It was from a number not saved in his contacts. The message read, "I can't keep doing this. You promised me." When Sarah confronted him, Marcus exploded, accusing her of not trusting him, of snooping through his private messages. The fight was so intense that Sarah's mother had to intervene. reminding them that cold feet were normal, that every couple fights before a wedding. Sarah apologized, convinced herself she was being paranoid, that the stress of wedding planning was making her see problems that didn't exist. She had no idea she was actually seeing the truth. The wedding was planned for Saturday afternoon at St. Mary's Cathedral, a beautiful historic church in downtown Austin where Sarah's parents had gotten married 40 years earlier. The rehearsal dinner on Friday night went perfectly, Marcus giving a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes, talking about how Sarah was the love of his life, his soulmate, the woman who made him want to be better. Sarah's father, Robert Mitchell, a retired police detective with an instinct for reading people, pulled Marcus aside after dinner. He told him, his voice quiet but firm, that if he ever hurt his daughter, there wouldn't be anywhere on earth he could hide. Marcus laughed it off, assured him that Sarah was his whole world, that he'd never do anything to jeopardize what they had. But Robert noticed something in Marcus's eyes, a flicker of guilt maybe, or fear, something that made his detective senses tingle. He mentioned it to his wife later that night, but she convinced him he was being overprotective, that it was just a father's natural anxiety about giving away his little girl. Sometimes the people who love us most can see the danger coming, but we're too blinded by our own happiness to listen. After the rehearsal dinner, the tradition dictated that Marcus and Sarah spend the night apart, seeing each other for the first time as she walked down the aisle. Marcus was staying at the Four Seasons Hotel downtown with his groomsmen, while Sarah was at the same hotel but on a different floor with her bridesmaids. The plan was simple: stay up late, laugh, drink champagne, celebrate the last night before everything changed. But around midnight, Sarah started feeling uneasy, a knot in her stomach that wouldn't go away, the kind of intuition women learn to trust but too often ignore. Her bridesmaids were dancing in the suite, music playing, someone suggesting they order more room service, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She told Jennifer she needed some air, maybe a walk around the hotel to clear her head. Jennifer offered to come with her, but Sarah insisted she was fine, just needed a few minutes alone. That walk would change everything. Sarah took the elevator down to the lobby, thinking she might step outside, get some fresh air, maybe call her mom just to hear her voice. But as she walked through the opulent hotel corridor, she heard laughter coming from one of the private conference rooms, the kind the hotel rented out for small gatherings. The sound stopped her in her tracks because she recognized the laugh. It was Marcus. Her heart started racing, that sick feeling in your stomach when you know something's wrong but you're not ready to face it. Sarah walked toward the conference room, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet, still wearing the casual clothes she'd changed into after dinner. The door was slightly ajar, just enough to see inside without being seen. And there he was, Marcus, her fiancé, the man she was supposed to marry in less than 12 hours, sitting on a couch with his arm wrapped around a woman. Not just any woman, Diana, his ex-wife, her long dark hair falling over her shoulders as she leaned into him, laughing at something he'd just said. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to look away, wanted to unsee what she was seeing, but she couldn't move. She watched as Marcus took Diana's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers in a way that was far too intimate, far too familiar to be innocent. Then she heard Diana's voice, soft but clear through the crack in the door, saying words that would replay in Sarah's mind for months afterward. Diana said, "I knew you'd come back to me. You always do. Tomorrow doesn't mean anything. We both know where you really belong." And Marcus, the man who had promised Sarah forever, who had looked into her eyes countless times and sworn he'd never hurt her, leaned in and kissed Diana with a passion that left no room for doubt about what was happening. Sarah's hand started shaking, tears burning at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't make a sound. Some part of her brain, the rational part that was somehow still functioning despite the emotional earthquake happening inside her, told her to stay quiet, to watch, to gather information before reacting. She stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, watching as Marcus and Diana talked in hushed voices, his hand moving to her face, her fingers running through his hair, the kind of intimacy that comes from years of knowing someone's body, someone's desires. Then Diana stood up, smoothing down her dress, and said something that made Sarah's blood run cold. She said, "Your room or mine? We've only got a few hours before you have to put on that monkey suit and pretend to be in love with her." Marcus laughed, actually laughed, and responded, "Mine's closer. Let's not waste time." They left the conference room through a different exit, never seeing Sarah standing in the hallway, her whole world crumbling around her. Sarah stood frozen, her mind racing through 1,000 thoughts at once. Should she confront them? Should she run back to her room and pretend she never saw anything? Should she call off the wedding right now, wake everyone up, tell them what she'd just witnessed? But then something shifted inside her, something cold and clear and absolutely certain. Sarah realized that she wasn't going to let Marcus humiliate her, wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart, wasn't going to let him control the narrative of their relationship's end. If this was how things were going to end, and they absolutely were going to end, then Sarah was going to be the one writing the final chapter. She pulled out her phone, her hands steadier now, and did something that would prove crucial in the hours to come. She went to the hotel's front desk, where the night manager, a kind woman named Patricia, was working the overnight shift. Sarah explained, as calmly as she could, that she needed a favor, needed access to the hotel's security footage from the conference room she'd just passed. Patricia started to explain that hotel policy didn't allow guest access to security footage, but something in Sarah's face, the quiet devastation mixed with steely determination, made her pause. Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Please. My wedding is tomorrow. I just saw my fiancé with another woman. I need proof of what I saw. I need to know I'm not crazy." Patricia's expression shifted from professional distance to genuine sympathy. She'd worked in hotels for 20 years, had seen her share of heartbreak played out in these hallways. She told Sarah to wait, disappeared into the back office, and returned 15 minutes later with a USB drive. She handed it to Sarah and said, "There's footage from the past 2 hours. I shouldn't be doing this, but no woman should walk down the aisle to a man who doesn't deserve her. Whatever you decide to do, I hope you find peace." Sarah took the USB drive and went back to her suite, slipping in quietly while her bridesmaids were still celebrating, oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding just floors away. She locked herself in the bathroom, sat on the cold tile floor, and let herself cry for exactly 5 minutes, setting a timer on her phone. When the timer went off, she washed her face, looked at herself in the mirror, and made a decision. She wasn't going to cancel the wedding. She wasn't going to run away or hide or let Marcus off easy. She was going to walk down that aisle tomorrow, was going to let every single person witness what was supposed to be the happiest moment of her life, and then she was going to show them all exactly who Marcus Webb really was. The next morning, Sarah woke up and went through all the motions of a bride preparing for her wedding. Hair, makeup, photos with her bridesmaids, champagne toasts, everything exactly as planned. Jennifer noticed that Sarah seemed quieter than usual, asked if she was feeling okay, if she had cold feet. Sarah smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach your eyes, and said she was fine, just overwhelmed with emotion. Which was true, just not the kind of emotion everyone assumed she was feeling. Her mother helped her into her wedding dress, a stunning ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves that had taken months to find, the perfect dress for what was supposed to be the perfect day. As her mother zipped up the back, tears streaming down her face with joy, Sarah felt a pang of guilt for what was about to happen, for the pain this would cause her family. But then she remembered Marcus kissing Diana, remembered him laughing about her, and the guilt transformed into something harder, something unbreakable. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock, and at 1:30, Sarah stood in the bride's room at the back of the church, looking at herself in the mirror one last time. She'd called her father in earlier, asked to speak with him privately. Robert Mitchell could tell immediately that something was wrong, his detective instincts firing on all cylinders. Sarah sat him down and said, "Dad, I need you to trust me today. Something's going to happen during the ceremony, something you're not expecting. I need you to not intervene, no matter how much you want to. Can you promise me that?" Robert studied his daughter's face, saw a strength there he'd always known she possessed but had never seen quite so clearly, and nodded. He said, "Whatever you need, sweetheart. I'm here." Sarah hugged him, whispering, "Thank you for always believing in me." Then the music started, that familiar wedding march that had played at thousands of weddings before, and Sarah took her father's arm. As they walked toward the church doors, Robert leaned down and whispered, "You know you don't have to do this, whatever this is. We can walk out right now. I'll handle everything." But Sarah shook her head, squeezed his arm, and said, "I know, Dad. But I need to do this my way." The doors opened, and there was the church, filled with 200 guests, flowers everywhere, candles glowing, and at the end of the aisle, Marcus stood in his tuxedo, looking nervous but happy, completely unaware of what was coming. Sarah walked down that aisle with her head held high, her bouquet of white roses steady in her hands, and when she reached Marcus, he smiled at her with what looked like genuine love. If she hadn't seen what she'd seen the night before, she might have believed it. The ceremony began, Reverend Thomas going through the traditional words about love and commitment, about becoming one flesh, about the sacred bond of marriage. When he asked if anyone had any reason why these two should not be wed, there was the traditional pause, that moment where everyone holds their breath even though nobody ever actually objects. Sarah felt the USB drive in her bouquet, hidden among the roses, and knew her moment was coming. Reverend Thomas turned to Marcus and said, "Marcus Elliot Webb, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Marcus looked at Sarah, his eyes soft, and said, "I do," without even the slightest hesitation. Then Reverend Thomas turned to Sarah and asked her the same question. This was it, the moment where Sarah could choose to be polite, to be the gracious bride everyone expected her to be, to say, "I do," and pretend like everything was fine, or she could tell the truth. Sarah looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear, "No, I don't." The church went absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Marcus's smile faltered, confusion crossing his face. He whispered, "Sarah, what are you doing?" But Sarah wasn't looking at him anymore. She turned to face the guests, all 200 of them sitting in shocked silence, their mouths literally hanging open. Sarah's voice was steady, clear, carrying through the cathedral like a bell. She said, "I'm sorry everyone had to come here today. I know you got dressed up, traveled from out of town, brought gifts, expecting to celebrate a wedding. And I want to thank you for that, for your love and support. But I can't marry this man. I can't stand here and promise forever to someone who spent last night with his ex-wife in a hotel room, someone who thinks so little of me that he'd betray me hours before our wedding." The gasps that rippled through the church sounded like a wave crashing. Marcus's face went white, then red, then white again. He reached for Sarah's arm, his voice panicked, saying, "Sarah, I don't know what you're talking about, you're confused, you're stressed, let's go somewhere private and talk about this." But Sarah pulled away from him, took the USB drive from her bouquet, and held it up. She said, "This is security footage from the Four Seasons Hotel, from last night at 12:30 a.m., showing you and Diana in the conference room on the second floor. Would you like me to play it for everyone here, or are you going to stop lying?" Marcus's face crumbled, the mask finally falling away, revealing the man he'd been hiding all along. He didn't deny it, couldn't deny it, just stood there as his best man, his groomsmen, his family, her family, everyone they knew watched him unravel. But Sarah wasn't finished. She turned to the crowd again and said, "I spent 3 years loving this man, believing in him, planning a future with him. Last night, I stood in a hotel hallway and watched him kiss another woman, heard him laugh about me, heard him plan to spend the night with her before coming here to marry me. And in that moment, I had a choice. I could run away, could cancel everything, could hide from the embarrassment and pain. Or I could stand here, in front of all of you, and choose myself. Choose my dignity. Choose to be a woman who doesn't accept betrayal just because it's easier than facing the truth." The silence that followed was profound, but then something unexpected happened. Sarah's grandmother, a tiny 80-year-old woman sitting in the front row, stood up and started clapping. Slowly, uncertainly at first, then with more conviction. Then Sarah's mother stood and joined her. Then Jennifer, Sarah's best friend. Then one by one, like a wave moving through the church, people stood up and applauded. Not for the wedding that didn't happen, but for the woman who had the strength to stop it. Marcus tried to speak, tried to defend himself, saying something about it being a misunderstanding, that Diana had shown up unexpectedly, that he'd been trying to tell her to leave. But nobody was listening to him anymore. Sarah's father, true to his promise, hadn't intervened during the ceremony, but now he walked up to Marcus, looked him dead in the eye, and said quietly, loud enough only for those nearby to hear, "You need to leave. Now. Before I forget I'm in a church." Marcus looked around at the faces staring at him, judgment and disgust written clearly on most of them, grabbed his best man's arm, and practically ran out of the church. The moment he was gone, Sarah felt her knees start to buckle, the adrenaline that had been holding her up suddenly draining away. Jennifer caught her before she fell, and Sarah finally let herself cry, not quiet tears but deep, body-shaking sobs, mourning not just the relationship she'd lost but the life she'd imagined, the future that would never happen. Her mother rushed to her side, wrapped her in her arms, and the bridesmaids formed a protective circle around her. Reverend Thomas, who'd been standing silent and shocked throughout all of this, cleared his throat and addressed the congregation. He said, "I think what we've witnessed here today is not the absence of love, but the presence of tremendous courage. Sarah Mitchell just showed us all what it means to respect yourself, to know your worth, to refuse to settle for less than you deserve. Let's give her our love and support as she begins this new chapter of her life." The reception, ironically, still happened. Sarah's parents had paid for everything, the venue was decorated, the food was prepared, the band was set up, and Sarah decided that she wasn't going to let Marcus's betrayal rob her of one more thing. She told her family that the party would go on, not as a wedding reception but as a celebration of new beginnings, of freedom, of self-respect. She changed out of her wedding dress into a simple but elegant cocktail dress she'd packed for the honeymoon, and walked into that reception hall with her head held high. The DJ, who'd been briefed on the situation, played "I Will Survive" as she entered, and the room erupted in cheers. People danced, ate, celebrated, and Sarah spent the evening surrounded by the people who truly loved her, who respected her choice, who understood that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what everyone expects you to want. Her best friend Jennifer gave a toast that brought both tears and laughter, saying, "Today we were supposed to celebrate Sarah joining her life with someone else's. Instead, we're celebrating something much more important, Sarah reclaiming her own life, her own future, her own happiness." Marcus Webb lost the best thing that ever happened to him. And Sarah, you just dodged the biggest bullet of your life. The next few days were a blur of canceling honeymoon reservations, returning wedding gifts, and dealing with the inevitable social media fallout. Because of course, in today's world, nothing stays private for long. Guests had recorded Sarah's speech on their phones, and within hours it was all over social media, going viral in a way that felt both vindicating and overwhelming. Comments poured in, thousands of them, mostly from women sharing their own stories of betrayal, of staying in relationships they should have left, of wishing they'd had Sarah's courage. Some criticized her, said she should have handled it privately, that public humiliation was cruel no matter what Marcus had done. But Sarah didn't read most of the comments, didn't engage with the social media storm. She turned off her phone for a week and focused on healing, on processing what had happened, on figuring out who she was outside of the relationship that had defined her for 3 years. Her therapist, Dr. Amanda Chen, helped her work through the complex emotions, the grief not just for the relationship but for the person she'd thought Marcus was, for the future she'd imagined that would never exist. Dr. Chen reminded her that grief is the price we pay for love, and that it's okay to mourn even when you're the one who made the choice to walk away. About 3 weeks after the non-wedding, Sarah's mother received a letter addressed to Sarah. It was from Diana, Marcus's ex-wife. Sarah almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of her. The letter was handwritten, several pages long, and it told a story that Sarah hadn't known. Diana explained that she and Marcus had never really divorced emotionally, that he'd kept coming back to her over the years, promising to leave whatever relationship he was in, promising they'd get back together, then disappearing for months at a time. Diana wrote, "I know you must hate me, and you have every right to. I was the other woman in your relationship, and there's no excuse for that. But I want you to know that Marcus told me you knew about us, that you'd agreed to an open relationship, that the wedding was just for show to please your family. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because I've spent 7 years hoping he'd choose me. When I saw the video of what happened at the church, I realized he'd been lying to both of us. I'm so sorry for my part in your pain. You deserve so much better than what either of us gave you." Sarah read the letter 3 times, each reading bringing a different emotion to the surface. Anger at first, then sadness, and finally, strangely, a kind of pity for Diana, for a woman who'd wasted 7 years of her life on a man who clearly didn't deserve her either. Sarah never responded to the letter, but she kept it as a reminder that Marcus's betrayal wasn't really about her at all, it was about his own deep character flaws, his inability to be honest, his compulsive need to keep his options open rather than fully committing to anyone. If this hooked you already, don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a comment because what happens next will absolutely shatter your expectations. 6 months after the wedding that didn't happen, Sarah decided to take the honeymoon trip she'd planned, but alone. She went to Italy, the country she and Marcus were supposed to explore together, and spent 2 weeks eating amazing food, seeing incredible art, and slowly rediscovering herself outside of the relationship that had consumed so much of her identity. In a small cafe in Florence, she met another solo traveler, a woman named Claire from London who was also recovering from a broken engagement. They spent 3 days together, talking about heartbreak and healing, about the courage it takes to start over, about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to us ends up being the best thing. Claire told Sarah something she's never forgotten. She said, "The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. You'll know you're truly healed when you can think about Marcus and feel nothing at all, not anger, not sadness, just a mild curiosity about how you ever thought that was love." It would take Sarah almost a year to reach that point, but when she finally did, when she could scroll past Marcus's social media profile without her heart rate increasing, when she could hear his name without feeling that twist in her stomach, she knew she'd made it to the other side. Sarah went back to work at the hospital with a new perspective on life, on relationships, on what really matters. She threw herself into her career, got promoted to Director of Operations, started a mentorship program for young women in healthcare administration. She learned to be alone without being lonely, to find joy in small things like Saturday morning coffee shops and sunset runs along the river. She dated occasionally, but casually, not looking to fill the void Marcus had left but rather exploring who she was attracted to when she wasn't trying to force a relationship to work. And slowly, without really noticing it happening, Sarah became happy again. Not the nervous, always on edge happiness she'd felt with Marcus, constantly worried about losing what she had, but a deep, settled contentment that came from knowing she could trust herself, knowing she had the strength to choose herself even when it was hard. Her friends noticed the change, said she seemed lighter somehow, like she'd put down a weight she'd been carrying for years. And she had. She'd put down the burden of loving someone who didn't love her enough, the exhausting work of ignoring red flags, the constant anxiety of a relationship built on lies. As for Marcus, Sarah heard through mutual friends that he and Diana had tried to make it work after the wedding disaster, but it fell apart within months. Apparently, without the thrill of sneaking around, without the forbidden nature of their relationship, they realized they didn't actually have much in common, didn't actually like each other all that much when forced to be honest. Last Sarah heard, Marcus had moved to another state, started over with a new job, a new life, hopefully learning from his mistakes, though she honestly didn't care either way. 2 years after the wedding that never was, Sarah met someone new. His name was David, and he was a pediatric surgeon at her hospital, quiet and thoughtful, the kind of person who noticed when you were having a bad day and brought you coffee without being asked. They became friends first, spending months just talking, getting to know each other without the pressure of romantic expectations. When they finally did start dating, it was slow and careful, both of them bringing their own wounds from past relationships, both of them committed to doing things differently this time. What struck Sarah most about David was his transparency, how he communicated openly about his feelings, his fears, his past mistakes. He'd been divorced, was honest about what went wrong, took responsibility for his part in it without making excuses. He treated Sarah with a respect and genuine care that she'd thought only existed in movies, the kind of love that doesn't require you to ignore your instincts or overlook red flags because there simply aren't any. On their first anniversary of dating, David took Sarah to dinner at the same restaurant where they'd had their first official date. He gave her a card that brought tears to her eyes. Inside, he'd written, "Thank you for giving love another chance. Thank you for being patient with my wounds while healing your own. Thank you for showing me what real courage looks like. You walked away from a wedding, stood in front of 200 people and chose yourself, and that's the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. I promise to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me. I promise to never make you regret taking this risk." Sarah cried reading it, but they were good tears, healing tears, tears that washed away the last lingering doubts that maybe she was broken, maybe she was unlovable, maybe what happened with Marcus was somehow her fault. Now, 5 years after that day in St. Mary's Cathedral, Sarah looks back on the whole experience as a turning point, not a tragedy. She's married to David now, actually married, in a small ceremony with just close family and friends, no big production, no cathedral, just love and honesty and two people genuinely committed to building a life together. They have a daughter, Emma, who's 2 years old and has her mother's determination and her father's kindness. Sarah sometimes thinks about who she would have become if she'd married Marcus, if she'd ignored what she saw that night, if she'd convinced herself it was just cold feet or pre-wedding jitters. She thinks about the life she would have lived, probably would have found out eventually about his ongoing relationship with Diana, probably would have divorced a few years down the line, maybe with kids involved, making everything messier and more painful. Walking away when she did, in the way she did, saved her from years of heartbreak, years of questioning herself, years of settling for less than she deserved. And the public nature of it, while humiliating at the time, ended up being liberating because it left no room for Marcus to control the narrative, to paint her as the villain, to twist the story into something it wasn't. Everyone who was there knew the truth, had seen it with their own eyes, and that gave Sarah a strange kind of power. When people ask Sarah for advice about relationships now, especially young women facing their own doubts about partners who aren't treating them right, she tells them the same thing every time. She says, trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't ignore red flags because you're invested in the relationship, because you've already sent out the invitations, because you're afraid of what people will think if you walk away. Your life is yours to live, and you don't owe anyone a performance of happiness if you're miserable inside. It takes more strength to stop a wedding than to go through with it. It takes more courage to admit you made a mistake than to double down on it. And most importantly, you teach people how to treat you. If you accept betrayal, if you forgive cheating without consequences, if you stay when every instinct is screaming at you to leave, you're telling that person that your boundaries don't matter, that your pain is negotiable, that you'll always be there no matter how badly they treat you. Don't do that to yourself. You deserve someone who chooses you, fully and completely, not someone who keeps one foot out the door just in case something better comes along. This advice comes from hard-won wisdom, from someone who lived through the pain of betrayal and came out stronger on the other side. If you're still here, subscribe, because stories like this only work when people stay. Think about Sarah's story for a moment. How would you have reacted if you were in her position? Would you have had the courage to walk down that aisle knowing what you knew, to stand in front of everyone you love and tell the truth, to choose your dignity over the comfort of pretending everything was fine? It's easy to say you would, easy to judge her actions from the safety of not being in that situation, but when you're actually living it, when the pressure of expectation and the fear of judgment are crushing down on you, when canceling means admitting failure and going through means lying to yourself, the choice becomes much harder. Sarah's decision wasn't just about Marcus, it was about the kind of person she wanted to be, the kind of life she wanted to live, the kind of love she was willing to accept. And in choosing herself in that moment, she set a precedent for every decision that came after. She learned that she could survive heartbreak, that she could face public scrutiny, that she could rebuild from rock bottom, and those lessons became the foundation of the life she built afterward. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are also the most transformative, the ones that crack us open and force us to grow in ways we never would have otherwise. Sarah's non-wedding was that moment for her. My mum said I can't hit 1,000 subscribers before today ends, subscribe and let's prove her wrong. As we close Sarah's story, it's worth reflecting on what it teaches us about love, trust, and self-respect. Real love doesn't require you to ignore your instincts or compromise your values. Real love doesn't sneak around behind your back or make you feel crazy for asking questions. Real love shows up honestly, treats you with respect, and chooses you consistently, not just when it's convenient. Marcus failed Sarah in the most fundamental way possible. He made a commitment he had no intention of keeping, he betrayed her trust repeatedly, and he expected her to be too naive or too invested to notice or care. What he didn't count on was her strength, her willingness to face an incredibly difficult truth rather than living a comfortable lie. And that's the ultimate lesson here: you can't build a life on a foundation of lies. Eventually, the truth comes out, and when it does, everything built on top of those lies comes crashing down. Better to face it sooner, when you still have time to rebuild, than later when the damage is even worse. Sarah gave herself that gift when she said, "I don't," instead of, "I do," when she chose a painful truth over a comfortable lie, when she walked out of that church alone but with her dignity intact. And everything good that came after, her healing, her career success, her genuine love with David, her daughter, her peace, all of it became possible because she was brave enough to choose herself first. Where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments below. And tell us honestly, could you have done what Sarah did? Could you have stood in front of everyone and exposed the truth, or would you have gone through with the wedding and dealt with it privately later? There's no right answer. Every situation is different. Every person has their own capacity for public confrontation versus private resolution. But Sarah's story reminds us that we have more strength than we think we do, that we're capable of making hard choices when we need to, that walking away from what's wrong is always better than staying because it's easier. The people in Sarah's life who truly loved her, her family, her real friends, they supported her decision even when it was shocking and unconventional. The people who criticized her, who said she should have handled it differently, who thought she was being dramatic or vindictive, those people revealed themselves as people who valued appearance over truth, who cared more about maintaining social norms than about Sarah's actual well-being. And that's another valuable lesson from this story: the people who stand by you in your hardest moments are the ones worth keeping in your life. Everyone else is just an audience member. Their opinions don't actually matter because they're not living your life, they're not feeling your pain, they're not the ones who have to wake up next to someone who betrayed them and pretend everything's fine. Sarah's story is ultimately about reclaiming your own narrative, about refusing to be a victim even when you've been victimized, about understanding that your worth isn't determined by whether someone chooses you but by whether you choose yourself. 5 years later, Sarah's life looks nothing like she imagined it would when she was planning that wedding to Marcus, and she's grateful for that every single day. She's grateful she found out before saying, "I do," rather than after. She's grateful she trusted her instincts when she saw something wrong rather than talking herself out of it. She's grateful she had the courage to tell the truth publicly rather than suffering in silence. And she's especially grateful that she didn't settle, that she held out for real love, for honest love, for the kind of partnership that builds you up rather than tears you down. Her daughter Emma will grow up watching her mother navigate the world with confidence and self-respect, learning from example that you never have to accept less than you deserve, that your voice matters, that your feelings are valid, that you can survive anything life throws at you as long as you stay true to yourself. These are the lessons Sarah learned in the hardest possible way, and now they're part of her legacy, part of what she'll pass on to her daughter and to everyone whose life she touches. The wedding that didn't happen ended up being the best thing that never happened to her, a painful gift disguised as a devastating loss, a door closing that forced her to find better doors to open. And isn't that how life works sometimes? The things we think will destroy us end up being exactly what we needed to become who we're meant to be. Sarah Mitchell walked down an aisle toward betrayal and walked back up it toward freedom. That's not a failed wedding. That's a successful escape. That's the beginning of everything that actually mattered.